I invite all of you to consider if it would serve you well to create a new story and a new path, and to please remember that the things that held you down will one day hold you up. Thank you.
As I sit back, reminisce when I was a youngster. Long before I had 4 younger brothers. The vision came to me, it's my vision and my purpose to serve the human race with some realistic.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's Derek, Demise, music and entertainment here. I have the honor of speaking with Sammy Rangel, the executive director of Life After Hate. I came across Sammy on the Tedx show. He captivated the audience. The standing ovation at the very end was absolutely amazing. He turned his life from a negative into a positive. And the best part about it is he wants to help others as well through that journey from being in a negative place in life, coming out stronger, coming out wiser, coming out better. Like I said, the honor of speaking with Sammy Rangel. I talked to him a few times on the phone and I FaceTimed him as well. And let's just get into this interview. I'm going to be asking a couple questions. For the record, this is a interview in which I am sending him the video and I'm sending him the questions. So it's not live, but just to let you know, that's how this operation is going. All right, Sammy, so I have about 5 questions for you here. And the first is, how was your life growing up and what memories stuck with you the most?
Hey, what's up, bro? First of all, thanks for having me on. Thanks for taking the time to notice some of the work I'm doing, some of the message that I'm sharing with everyone. It's always a blessing to understand that people out there can relate and benefit from sharing experiences and lessons learned, regardless of what we've been through or what we haven't been through. You know, I think what you're doing is great, finding music to express ourselves. You know, we all need an outlet of some sort. For some of us, writing, singing, rapping, working out, whatever it is. You know, I've got a number of outlets myself. To get to the question of how my life was growing up, what memories stick with me the most. You know, for the most part, life was pretty shitty, man. I was the second child that my mother had tried to kill. For 45 years, I thought I was the only one. And then a family secret was revealed, letting me know that I had an older brother named Ricky Renee, who my mother had nearly killed when he was 20 months old while she was 5 months pregnant with me. After I finished my book and after I found my brother, I found the other side of the family that my mother had removed us from. And more than likely, she didn't want to answer questions anymore about him or me. But they let me know that even when I was an infant, she was beating the crap out of me, losing her temper. They'd have to pull her off. By the time I was 3 and my sister, who was 5, my mother's brother had started to sexually assault us. Eventually, we told her. She failed to protect us, failed to believe us. She made us continue to go around this person, show him love and affection, respect. And basically our abuse was denied. But at the same time, my mother was doing just as much harm to me physically and emotionally, spiritually, as anyone else was. The things that stick with me the most are probably the rare instances of peace or tranquility that I had found in certain little things in life that I appreciate today. Like playing with my sister, running through the woods on in Texas, barefooted on the rocks, catching 2-headed snakes and those little horny-toed lizards. Rare occasions of going fishing with my father. I remember those because they're so few and far in between, and while I'd like to think that my whole life was horrible, 99.8 of it was, and I still had that little 0.02% that was valuable to me. But I also remember all the hard times, and I remember the lessons that have come out of that. I think one of the other things that I remember is how close me and my sister were. She would always be there for me, protecting me, sneaking me food, defending me, sneaking me messages, and giving me those looks, that let me know that she loved me. I often felt alone, but with my sister, I know that I wasn't alone. And I also know that she was going through a lot, just watching what I was going through. And of course, while she wasn't beaten like I was, a lot of the games that my mom played affected us both deeply.
All right, Sammy. So the second question here is, if the you today could give any advice to the you at 15 years old, what advice would that be? So the you, as of right now, this very moment, what would you tell yourself at 15 years old if you can go back in time, or if you could just somehow magically tell yourself at 15? What advice would you give yourself? What would you tell yourself not to do? Or what would you have done differently? So please feel free to share. Thank you.
What advice would I give myself at the age of 15? Well, you got to put this into perspective, man. At the age of 15, I was a handful. I was deep into the gangs. I had already buried my first child several years ago. I haven't seen my brothers and sister in a very long time. I've been into mental institutions, shipped out of state because the state I was from couldn't control me, and they wanted to separate me and my friends because we were, super violent and aggressive and unruly, if you will. I was highly promiscuous. I had no empathy. I had no compassion for others. And while I don't think that I was an extremist yet, I was well on my way. I think I was angry. I hadn't become hateful yet, but I was a very angry person. I was also, and I think that was because of how hurt I was by, what I later figured out was like abandonment and betrayal by my family. Of course, the abuse, being separated from the people I love the most, my siblings, because of what my parents were doing, being made out to be the bad guy by my family because I was a runaway when really I was running away to escape my tormentors. What advice would I give to my 15-year-old self? That's tough because I know that at 15 I had already stopped listening. I had already stopped trusting. I had already shut down. I was hopeless about life and about others. I just really was living moment by moment. I don't know that advice always is the best path. We try to fill that void that we see in people with words. And what I think might have mattered most to me was just being present, loving me for who I was then, not being pushed away, not being rejected because of who I was. Just the opposite of everything everyone else seemed to be in my life at that point. But if I had to share some words, be that I was going to make it. One day I was going to make it. I was going to stand tall, that they wouldn't break me, they hadn't broken me, that I was worthy, I was lovable, capable of loving, and someday my voice would matter.
My third question for you, Sammy, is what key moment helped you overcome your difficult past? What was the key moment? What was the turning point of it all?
You asked about key moments here. What helped me overcome my past? I think it's important that we understand that normally what I've found out throughout my professional and personal experience is that normally it's a constellation or a collection of things that finally find, its way into making sense in your heart and your mind. There were obviously a lot of opportunities throughout my life that I didn't recognize then, but looking back, I see I had opportunities to change or grow or to heal that I didn't know how to take advantage of. It wasn't that I didn't want to change. It wasn't that I didn't want a better life. I didn't know I needed to. I just thought this was the way life is, the way it was, what my lot was, and I was just kind of destined and doomed to carry it out, But I do remember that, at the age of 29, I was in a treatment program in prison, forced upon me, didn't want to be there, was resisting being there the whole time I was there. But it was a moment when I was forced unknowingly to myself to identify with my abusers, and then to also understand that I had adopted some of the values of the people I hated, and that didn't sit well with me. By identifying with my abusers, what do I mean by that? I mean, while I could talk about my own abuse, the abuse that was poured down on me, and it was pretty significant, man. It was abuse is one level. I think torture, many attempts to take my life by my parents were made on me. Starvation, sleep deprivation to an extreme, humiliation and shame. It was pretty bad, man. While I could talk about that, I never really felt that I was responsible for the harm that I had done, because I blamed my parents, and primarily my mother. I blamed my mother for making me this way. I felt felt like her treatment had formed me into the person I had become. Throughout this intervention process with this therapist, he asked me some questions that introduced me to things I didn't know about myself. It kind of slipped in there, He did it in a way that I wasn't expecting, and so it got past my defenses, right? And, one of the questions he asked me is if I had ever hurt my children the way that my mother had hurt me. And at this point, physically I could say no, but honestly I had to say yes, because my son was 11 years old at this time, and I had been in prison his whole life. I had a daughter who was 12 at the time, who I had never seen because I was in prison her whole life. And so there was that abandonment piece. But then he took it a step further. He asked me if I loved my kids, and of course I do. And he said, well, before you did this prison time, you were at another prison, correct? And I was like, yes. And it turned out that there was like a 7-month window between prison sentences. And he had asked me if I had done anything to look for my daughter while I was out, since I loved her so much. And, I was always talking about it and describing myself as a victim for not having, her in my life, totally blaming her mother, who had made, probably a wise decision, keeping her from me at that period of my life. And then he asked me, how can I say I love her if when I had the opportunity, I didn't take advantage of the opportunity to find her, to lift a single finger in effort of locating her. And that also affected me deeply, because I realized that I again had abandoned my child when I had the opportunity to make a wrong right. I didn't. But then he also helped me understand, while I felt this way about my abuse, I had also made other people feel the way I had through my own abuse, through my crimes, through my violence, through my hate. Certainly I was very hateful by this time. I would call myself a killer, I was very aggressive and hostile and brutal. I was known as one of the most violent inmates in the system. I had a track record for being extremely aggressive, which is why I did so much time in prison in the hole for violent crimes. And so I would say that coming to terms with that. And once I recognized how I had become like the people I hated, who I was blaming for who I was, I think the sympathy I had for myself started to carry over to my mother, because I knew my mother had a very similar upbringing as I had had. And I could then see her process of how she became the way she was. It didn't make it right or better, but I started to understand. Instead of just judging and evaluating her, I started to understand how she became the same way I wanted to be understood by how I became. And I felt completely justified being the way I was based on her treatment of me. So why wasn't she entitled to the same if she was also a victim like I was? Again, not excusing her behavior. To this day I don't, but it helped me to have empathy. And by this point in my life, empathy wasn't a part of my life. It wasn't a part of my vocabulary. I had it before I knew what to call it. And it was buried in there. It was buried in there. And then at the same time, I realized that I had abandoned my children, that I wasn't a victim. I had actually removed myself from their life by the lifestyle I had chosen, and I wanted to do everything I could to get back into their life. And then I realized that in order to do that, I had a lot of making up, a lot of amends to make, a lot of reconciling to do. And so at that point, I decided that from that moment forward, I would put all my effort and energy into trying to get my life together and to be there for the people that I love the most. And here I am today, 18 years later, still doing it.
All right, Sammy. So question number 4. Has your race or ethnicity ever brought negativity or positivity to your life? I myself, being of Hispanic, Caucasian, and Native background, I have fit into some stereotypes of all, and I just want to know what your ethnicity or race has brought to you in your life, negative or positive.
That's a loaded question about race and ethnicity. It's done both, and it really started at home. My mom is Mescalero Apache and Tejana, and my dad is a Tejano. And, most of my family for generations has lived and born and bred in Texas. And I know my family grew up in the Texas area in the 50s and 60s when racial tension and shaming was very high. There were still laws in place that prohibited natives or Mexicanos Even if you were a U.S. citizen, from owning property and going to school and speaking certain languages, and couldn't practice your traditions or customs publicly. And so that transferred to my mother, and my mother transferred that on to us. There was a time when I was a kid, and my mom make tortillas and beans, and we were poor, so sometimes we'd only have tortillas and gravy made out of bacon fat to eat, and we'd have the tortillas with the butter, and the butter would be rolling down your forearms, and we were just a typical poor family just trying to make it. And but I know that I was shamed. My mom had made some beans one day, and I didn't know the names of the beans, so my mom asked me what kind of beans did I want, and I said I want some brown ones like my skin. And my mom smacked me in the mouth for that, and I didn't understand that for a long time. That hurt me. It caused a wound, but I kind of got this idea, this message that we shouldn't be talking about things like that. And while my parents spoke different languages in the house, we were only allowed to speak and answer in English. I was about 11 before I even knew how to speak Spanish. But then I couldn't even speak it very well, but I knew enough to communicate. I could understand it all. And I grew up in a Puerto Rican neighborhood after I left home, so there was always racial tension there. Plus I was a runaway and a homeless kid for a long time, so I really didn't fit in, but I fought to fit in, and over the years, I tried to, and while I did make a name for myself and fit in, I just never really felt like I honestly fit in. Ironically, when I was in prison at the age of 22 for the second time, my first time I did time in Illinois, my second bit I was here in Wisconsin for violent gun crimes. I was sitting in the hole, and a gentleman who didn't know me and I didn't know him was a lifer. His name was Eddie Belmaris. This was back in like 92, 93. And Eddie is still locked up, by the way. I saw him recently, while I was doing some work in one of the prisons. But Eddie took it upon himself to photocopy an entire book, a history book, and send it to me. And the name of that book was The Prehistoric Mesoamerica. And it was about pre-Columbian times here in Central America, South America, the U.S., of course. And it talked about different tribes, that were influential here on this Western Hemisphere. And the grandfather tribe was the Olmecas that I read about in this book. And the Olmecas were really the first tribe, recorded history that could be documented, who created agriculture, who had a system of government, who helped tribes go from nomadic to agricultural, meaning that they went from following the food and herds to planting foods and establishing communities. And a lot of this was recorded through their pottery. And then you could see, as the years went on, generations went on, decades went on, the influence on other distant relatives based on the pottery influences on these civilizations and culture throughout the Americas here. That was the first time I had ever heard anything good about us, about my people. And even though I didn't know it, I had established a goal. I was reading that book. I was sitting in the hole. I was in the hole for years at a time. And, reading this book, I started to feel something inside that felt good about, where my people come from. I remember reading about the ruins, and what they look like and how these civilizations flourished and were huge and gigantic and influential even throughout today. And I told myself I want to go there. And 2 years after I was released, that would have been 9 years later, I went to the ruins that I had read about in that book in Mexico to visit them. Today I sit on a Native American drum called Seven Springs, and I do pipe and drum ceremonies in the prisons with men and women here. I personally do sweat lodges with my family. I have been adopted by Lakotas, and so most of my teachings and my language and my customs and traditions and beliefs stem from that. And so while in the beginning I was very ashamed, taught to be very ashamed of who I am, today I'm very proud of who I am, and I hope others feel the same way about it.
All right, Sammy. So this is the last final question here for you. It says, well, it's a couple questions. What organizations are you a part of? Who would you like to meet? What are some goals in the next 5 years? And what would you like to tell any young teenagers or young people, or even people that are your age, who are feeling how you felt around that age? Or what would you want to tell people that are going through hard times and have always had that dark cloud over their head? What would you want to what advice would you give them? Age doesn't matter, actually. You know, if you could tell teenagers, or if you could tell people in their young 20s, or even people your age that have not made it out of that negative spot, what advice would you give them? And you know, that's some very powerful stuff, and I believe that you, Sammy, are someone that can definitely help pave the way and shed some light on these dark topics that people usually don't want to talk about.
So what advice would I give somebody going through hard times and dark times? You know, I have a thing about advice. You know, I don't, who am I? You know, I'm just one of the people, right? And so maybe not necessarily advice as much as just share my experience, right? And what my experience has taught me is that the things that hold us down right now will one day hold us up. You know, and it's this mindset that we have to have, you know, knowing that what we're experiencing right now isn't the way life will or should always be. At some point, we have to grow and heal and recover and forgive and reconcile, and not to be so close to those ideas in the future if right now they're impossible to think about. You know, you just have to understand, I think, on some level, that what you're going through is a part of preparation and formation for who you need to be to handle the next stage in your life. It can be really hard to see that while you're in the middle of all this trouble and all this hardship and heartache and anger and hate and pain. But there's a part of you that knows that that's true. You won't always be going through this, and you won't always be this way. The idea, though, is to take your suffering and to turn it into something that was worth it by making it a valuable lesson rather than a pointless experience, right? And so you have to maintain your strength and courage in the face of all of this. Don't fall apart when things get hard. That's when you're supposed to step up. That's when the best parts of you need to come out. You can do this. You have it within you, and you're not alone. So some of my goals, right? I'm always working on goals. You know, 18 years ago when I walked out of prison, I wanted to go get an associate's degree. I went on and got a bachelor's degree, and then I went and got a master's degree. And today, this year, I decided to go ahead and get my PhD. So I'm currently a student in industrial and organizational psychology, because I want to understand systems and government programs and program development so that I can help shape the way those things are created and how they're given to the people. I want to be an influence on that level at this point in my life. Who would I like to meet? I'd actually like to go in the past and meet myself when I was 3 and 4 and give that person a hug. I think that's what I needed the most. I just needed a friend. And I heard this actor say that his hero is himself 5 years from now. And no matter how close you get to that 5 years from now, there's still another 5 years from now. And so I'm still excited to see who I'll be 5 years from now and what I'll be 5 years from now. And while I'll never be that hero, there's no harm in pursuing that idea. Much love for the project and what you're doing, brother. Keep it up. You have no idea how you may be influencing the lives of some of these people listening. Thank you, brother. We'll talk soon.
I try to change the past, but I know that